Well, hello and welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host. I'm excited to bring you a second conversation with Barry Taylor, just Barry this time. And thank you for Pete participating in the previous episode. But today I bring you Barry Taylor once again. I'm going to read through his bio and then get to some details on the podcast, and we'll get started. Barry Taylor lives and works in London, having returned to the UK after many years in Los Angeles. He's committed his life to following his curiosities, which have taken many forms, including music, fashion, art, religion, and academia. His interests primarily lie in the areas of religion, theology, and philosophy, particularly exploring how cultural shifts reshape our understanding of what it means to be human, our interactions with others, and our grappling with fundamental questions about human existence and ultimate meaning. His wide variety of interests currently converge around the impact of technology on society and culture. Taylor teaches for an online graduate program, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, and writes extensively on his Patreon page. Check it out at patreon.com/Barry Taylor. He also engages with the complexities of contemporary life and shares his insights on Instagram at UKBloke. Check that out. Barry, really, y'all get the background on Barry soon, but it was so great to connect with you, Barry. A second time. I look forward to more. Sorry for the delay in posting a podcast. It's been a long time. So the reason being is that I'm working on a book, and I've just been taken with it totally. So all things have kind of been affected by this. So I'll get back in the habit of posting more regularly soon. But for now, I've really got to hit this deadline. So I look forward to sharing that with all of you when it is finished. Upcoming stuff coming up. Will Keepin and Cynthia Bricks from Jerry, Gender Equity Reconciliation International are coming on, along with a slew of others. But I'm doing just a little slow right now, so I can finish this deadline. I should have the first draft finished next month, and then I'll be going through the process, and hopefully we'll get that out to all of you within the next 6 months, 12 months. I don't know. Other than that, be sure to check out the Center for HAS.com, an integrative wellness practice that my wife and I started many moons ago. Check out the Sacred Speaks, thesacredspeaks.com, and the Young Center in Houston, younghouston.org. And as always, the music, hang out till the end of the episode, listen to the full selection of Clouds theme song for the Sacred Speaks from Modern Nations. Check them out at modernnationsmusic.com. And I think that's it. I'm excited this was fun to get into. I mean, having about a month or 5 weeks off from this routine, an exciting experience to dive back into processing the podcast. I really feel such a deep sense of reverence to be able to do this. So thank you. And for now, we'll leave it there. Barry, welcome, man. As of this week, the conversation that you, Pete Holmes, and I shared came out, and I am very excited that you and I agreed to kind of dig in to this thread of theology and spirituality and religion and philosophy and rock and roll. Because interestingly enough, my dissertation was on the psychology of fame. And so as I was reading your book, which anybody who this seems like it was a book that I wish I would have read when I was doing my dissertation, by the way, because you dove into all kinds of subjects sex, God, and rock and roll, catastrophes, epiphanies, and sacred anarchies. It's my kind of title, man. Well done.
Yeah, I have to say that the sex, God, and rock and roll thing was not a real choice of mine.
Yeah, the publishers get you, don't they?
Well, when I was, we don't really need to go into it, but when I was asked what the book was going to be about, I was like, sex, God, rock and roll. And I wrote that down on their thing. And, I had other titles that I thought were much less, I don't know. It just seems like that's been done, but whatever.
Yeah. It's yours is catchy.
Yeah.
So I want to go a little bit like with your book, but I owe a debt of gratitude to Matt Russell, who has been a participant on this podcast. He has such lovely things to say about you. And I really respect Matt's approach, not only to the world, but also
hearing him think through uh, issues of religion and spirituality, and also just engaging in action. And
Yeah, yeah.
he
I've always
speaks so. Go on.
no, I've always loved that about Matt. He's always put his money where his mouth is.
Without a doubt, and the fact that he's so interested in your approach was one of the things that I was so excited to continue to carry on in this conversation.
Yeah, I was actually kind of we. It's not that we didn't really sort of fall out of contact, but you know how it is when you live on different sides of the world and in different places that
Yeah.
those things ebb and flow. So I've been really happy to reconnect more fully with Matt lately. We've been doing a little bit of talking about some books that I recommended to him that
So I hear.
he kind of liked. So that was
Yeah.
kind of
Well, let's dive into early life because you started with some pretty awesome stories, and of course we got need to tip the hat to your experiences with ACDC. But I'm very much interested in, as we talked about in the previous episode with Pete, transgression and rock and roll in particular.
yeah,
And you mentioned that, yeah, I think you said you were really into blues, and
yeah. I mean, I grew up and yeah, it's funny. I have no issue with the whole AC/DC connection. I don't really much. I try not to mind it very much. It was such another
Mhm,
life. Do you know what I mean? It's not like,
totally.
but it's part of the music fabric
Hmm.
of my life. But yeah, I grew up, growing up in England when what I sort of came of age in the 70s, but in the part of the world where I lived, and in the sort of I suppose if generation is the right word, but in the time that I lived and the people that I hung around with, the music that we listened to was largely American
Hmm.
and mostly uh, black musicians, and I had a friend who lived down the street from me. He was a little bit older, and his entire bedroom was full of albums. And I used to go around, and he basically schooled me in the blues.
Hmm.
I mean, he was really into a lot of stuff. He was a DJ, but he also had a really great. So BB King, Albert King, Benny King, name a king. The Kings were there. The gospel, the Clark sisters, Bessie Smith, all that stuff. So and that was very much in the fabric of my life. R&B and soul music was kind of the real bedrock. And when you're young, you tend to be naively snobbish about the genres of music that you like. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I had no time for like the Beatles or the Stones or any. I just wasn't interested. I said it elsewhere. I liked Van Morrison, but I liked Van Morrison because he was trying to be like a soul singer.
Hmm.
He had the Caledonian horns, and he was going for that sort of organically Irish kind of soulful thing. But apart from that, it was really, it was Curtis Mayfield and Donny Hathaway. I mean, I've had an album by Donny Hathaway called Extensions of a Man
Hmm.
since about 1974 or five when I first
Oh,
ever heard.
I just imagine that was pretty transgressive for a young guy growing up in. Did you grow up in London?
No, no, no. I grew up in a small town near Cambridge.
Hmm.
So out in the country, very kind of boring, essentially, in the way that all places are when you're young and restless, But no, but so all of most of my friends, that was the kind of music that we listened to, and really what blew me out of well, what opened the door to that were a few things, but one of them was David Bowie.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
and I'd heard David Bowie, but I hadn't paid much attention. But I went to some party, and I just remember walking into this living room and Suffragette City was playing, and something about it just got me, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I think it was the otherness of it, and that's what I loved about R&B and soul music and stuff, was it was so other. People singing about whatever the conditions were, whether it was, Curtis Mayfield singing about, Superfly and all that stuff, or just the whole sort of African American experience, or whether it was even the gospel stuff. I mean, the only church experiences I had were, either school assemblies or my granny's Methodist church, and you weren't hearing any gospel choirs at those
No,
things. So there was always this thing for me that music was, it just dealt with the kind of the unspoken otherness of existence. It was always somewhere else, and speaking of things that you really couldn't sort of put into just dialogue. You needed a song to voice all that stuff. So yeah, so that was, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but
No, I keep thinking they call it soul for a reason.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that otherness too, it reminds me of, because when I was growing up, it was
My mug, by the way.
fantastic. Yeah, it was primarily hip hop that we were listening
Oh,
to in
yeah,
in the States. And so I project onto that it felt something very other and similar.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what's interesting about music to me is I mean, I I appreciate lyrics, and and,
Hmm.
and I love, there, but I'm not a lyric first person.
Hmm.
There are songs that I've
I'm
listened
with you.
to. There are songs that I've listened to my whole life, and I could barely sing the chorus of it, but that song lives inside me, And there are a few songs where the lyrics have actually been a kind of key moment of transition, or awareness in my life. But first and foremost, for me, I think music is an emotional language,
Hmm.
and it creates. There's this really interesting book. I think it came out in the 50s by this philosopher Susan Langer, called "Philosophy in a New Key," and she
Mm.
talked about the fact that music is, it's a symbolic language. So
Yeah.
you
Go
know
go
the,
go into that a little bit though.
well, the so like, if you listen to, I don't know, listen to Otis Redding, "Try a Little Tenderness." I mean, somehow he can make that three-letter word "try" contain a whole world of heartbreak, and it lasts for like 5 syllables. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like, sometimes if you analyze, she loves you, yeah, yeah, she loves you, yeah, yeah, she loves you, yeah, yeah, with a love like that, it can't be bad. I mean, what is that? It's nothing. It, on paper, it's so puerile
Mm.
and devoid of substance, but you put voice to it, and you put bass and drums and guitar, and suddenly the arc of the meaning of that song, all of the longing, and the yearning, perhaps, and the alienation and the heartbreak, all those things, it's wrapped up in the emotional arc of the music, or at least that's what it is to me. So I always sort of consider music this kind of symbolic way of feeling what we can't say. And it's very, it's very particular. I mean,
Hmm.
people can listen to the same song and it can mean something entirely different,
Hmm.
because it becomes localized. And I remember there's this song by Jackson Brown called "Something Fine," which is one of the lyric songs that really shifted kind of a little bit of my sort of self understanding. And it's a, you know, it's a sort of romance song of some kind, but it's got these elements in it, and there there were just these profound moments. The chorus is, "You say Morocco, and that makes me smile. I haven't seen Morocco in a long, long while." And you know, and then but in there's a little bit where it says, "The world outside is tugging like a beggar at my sleeve, but that's much too old a story to believe." And when I
Mm.
heard, I was like, that that's what I'm feeling. That I feel that
Mhm.
pull,
Mhm.
and that was a song that, in some ways, allowed me to give myself permission to embark on a sort of journey in life. And it was pivoted around these sort of, there's a bit about California and there's a bit about England floating in a mist, in a silver mist, so cool and so green. And so you've got California and you've got England and you've got Morocco. So you've got adventure and you've got the complete otherness of Africa. And in the middle, you've got England in this grey, silvery mist. And somehow in all of that, combined with like just the beauty of the way the song was played, it just gave me something that I hadn't been able to find um, alone.
Mm.
Jeez,
I,
that was long.
I kept hey, that's good. We get to do that. So I kept having this image of a conductor and all the different sounds of a symphony.
Yeah,
And now I don't know, something about that makes it pretty elegant in that the composer of a symphony utilizes the different sounds to evoke different personalities
yeah,
in an opera, for example. And and like maybe electronic dance music gets pretty close to that, and that there's this real like
yeah,
emotional center that's not as rational because there aren't as many lyrics. But
yeah,
I'm with you too, man. I tend to hear song forward lyric maybe never, like I'll catch some of them but not much until
yeah,
I really dig into it, and then I'll sit with lyrics and
yeah. And I do. I mean, I love, you know, I like Leonard Cohen and, you
mm,
know,
hmm
people that really dig into words. I mean, I'm there for all of that. It's not that I don't dismiss lyrics. It's just that, to me, that you can't really separate them from the context that they're in. You know, the
hmm
song is what gives those words the meaning.
well, it's funny. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but one of the things that brought you into my life was, of course, that quote that I stumbled onto that Pete draws from you. And of course, what you're saying there is something you said in our conversation, just about the words can't travel where the symbol can, which
Yeah.
is my projection. But I, this beautiful quote about the mystery
Mm.
and the words we give the mystery. And so I think that brings us into theology and music, and you've been teaching on this for a while. So I want to just throw that ball out there because I certainly want to get into um, a kind of more mystically oriented theological approach, and a direct experience, and
Yeah.
and dive.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said on our conversation, I'm not much of a mystic, and I think and actually what I actually said was, well, I can't remember what I actually said, but what I know I actually didn't use the word mystery. I said that the word God is a blanket that we throw on the invisible to give it,
Mm,
which for me, because I was thinking about that
mm,
context of how we use words to describe the indescribable. So to
mm-hmm,
me, the word God is a word that we've generated to sort of give shape to, or give answer, or give some point of reference to that which you can't access necessarily through the senses. But yeah, the mystical. I mean, mysticism to me. I mean, I I like the mystics. I'm quite sort of fascinated by those 13th and 14th century largely female mystics, the ones that sort of were, you know, bricked up in anchorite houses and just sort of lived inside a little cave, and all the experiences where I sort of where I guess where I kind of part company is wrong, because I'm not that I'm not that sort of dogmatic really, but I don't really um, think about I don't think about God too much, and and for me, a lot of mysticism is still tied up to a kind of supernaturalistic theism. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I have no no axe to grind with that. It's just not particularly where I find myself. But I do think that there is something incredibly fascinating about the mysterious, the mystery, and the mystical, that has a lot of resonance and importance within our world. You know what I mean? And I think the again, I just think it sort of goes back to that comment. Really, it's just for me that I think sometimes people try and get a little too forensic around, or I think sometimes we get a little too forensic and try and nail things down a little too precisely, when
That
to
was
me
a
the whole
that,
thing is a little vaguer.
nail it down. That was good. Uh, so, so yeah, you said supernatural theism,
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't know what that means, and so two things that I think are really important is like what supernatural theism is, but also there's this really cool thread of something supernatural and something other. And so I
yeah,
think that it tunes right back into our initial part of the conversation around the kind of music that turns us on and the kind of images that the counterculture offers us when you juxtapose counterculture and pop culture together, and where
yeah,
those
yeah.
come together. And I know you can riff on that forever.
Nah,
I'll just chide you along here,
I got nothing.
know.
Um, I think so. Here, I think there is that there's part of what it means to be human is the sense that we know a lot about ourselves, and there's a huge part of ourselves that we don't know.
Mm.
So the perennial questions of ultimacy,
Mm-hmm.
why are we here? Who made the, all of those questions that
Yeah.
down through the ages have been addressed in various ways, particularly historically through the realm of the kind of religious and the mythic, the sort of stories that have given shape to sort of cultural views of how, our understanding of ourselves and each other and the world around us. And I think where I've sort of where I got to, I think when I was younger, I was trying in many ways, I think, to kind of address what I can only really describe as my melancholy.
Mm.
Sort of haunted by a kind of melancholy, depression, maybe. I don't know. I don't, don't want to dig too deep into those things. I mean, I have done, but um, and I thought that I need that I was lacking some kind of meaning structure to help me like eradicate this feeling that there was something lacking or something
Oh,
missing. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
totally.
but I didn't. I felt that I didn't have the tools, kind of emotionally or psychically, to kind of do that. To sort of work to come to terms with my own makeup, my own personhood, my own subjectivity in the world, and really to sort of address what to me felt like some kind of disconnection, that
Mm-hmm.
somehow all
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
bits weren't joined up, and you know things like curiosity and I don't know, loads of things, and so when to cut a long story short, when sort of religion showed up in a more significant way in my world when I was a bit older, um, its promises, or at least what were presented to me as its promises, seemed to offer a kind of pathway through that. Um, and that was a sort of trajectory, if you like, of meaning that I chose to explore. But as time sort of went on, there was a like creeping realization that a lot of it just wasn't for me, and that I actually wasn't really looking for some overarching meaning structure. That's not what I wanted at all. What I was trying to come to terms with was just myself, both internally and externally, with the world. So internally with myself, but also externally with myself and the world and other people around me. And what that sort of led me to was a kind of radical redressing of the whole notion of religion, belief, faith, all that kind of stuff. Because there were some things going on in and under the name of religion that did hold appeal to me. Generosity and kindness and hospitality and ultimately love. It's not that I couldn't have found those things elsewhere, but religion has done a really good job of gathering up some of the sort of seminal virtues often disregarded in the search for power or whatever else,
Mm-hmm.
and given them places to live, and kept them alive, and so so it wasn't like I just wanted to abandon everything. But what I did let go of was this idea that I needed some kind of destination trajectory in life. All these things and this is where you're gonna wind up, or this is what life means. I think what I came to through this long journey is that ultimately for me, what's at the core of being human is a whole set of questions, yearnings, longings,
Mm-hmm.
emptinesses that actually will never have a clear answer,
Mm-hmm.
that never be clarity, and that is actually a gift. That
Mm-hmm.
is the gift of what it means to be human. That if we're sort of aware, I mean, Lacan, calls it the lack,
Mm-hmm.
calls it the void. I mean, there are lots of, Buddhists call it emptiness or nothingness. There are all these names for it, and various different things. Some people try to fill it. Some people try and make you stare into it. You know, Nietzsche wants you to stare into the abyss, and then they have the abyss stare back at you. You know what I mean? Psychoanalysis wants you to embrace the lack, and I think those are all interesting ways of addressing the fact that at the heart of what it means to be human, there actually is there is something that is there that actually is the greatest gift of human subjectivity, in that it can't be answered, and or it can only be guessed at, if you like, or theorized. You know what I mean? And there are some great concepts and stuff out and about in all of that. So I don't even know if this is answering your question.
It's great. Don't stop. Keep going.
So what it became for me, that there's an Italian philosopher, Rosie Braidotti, and she has this concept called nomadic theory.
Mm.
And she talks about nomadic subjectivity, and basically, and I actually don't even need her to reference it, because I felt similar things. I just felt when I came across it that she did it much better than I did. That ultimately we're sort of at a point in our world, and I felt like I was at a point in my own life where many of the sort of traditional points of reference and ways of understanding and looking at the world, you know, habits of thought and stuff like that, just could be recomposed, reconceptualized for the world that I find myself in, that you find yourself in, that we find ourselves in. So I don't know where I was going with all of that. Maybe you should say something so I can.
Well,
I don't.
I'm
I forget
happy to, because what I started to think about when you were talking about these unanswerable questions is that certainly mystery is a good
Sure.
image for that, you know, and
Yeah.
that there that I and of course we live in a pretty consumerist, if not totally consumerist culture that is teaching to be filled up, and
Yeah.
and so the one of the things that I tend to borrow from in this circumstance is kenosis
Mm.
as an ancient religious process that involves emptying yourself out. Um, Something that Richard Rohr said a while back, that you know we all riffed on Rohr's work, and he gave me a gift when he mentioned that Christianity was not intended to be about the demonic, to you know saving from the demonic, but
Yeah.
in fact it was a practice to manage the inevitabilities of the ego. You know that our egos are inevitably going to seek out status, power, survival, protection, boundary lines between us and them. You know, either or thinking, and as a result, we have the separateness, we have a power differentiation. You know, there's all kinds of issues that if left unchecked and if left it becomes rotting. You know, it becomes like we're too full. So I love this concept that you're talking about in longing, and that on some level I always yearned for. Here's a longing. I always yearned for religions to teach how to interpret aspects of reality, as
Mm.
opposed to telling us this is what reality is. And so just let's stir that up a little bit and see where that takes you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, reality. You know, I mean, we talk about reality like we know what
Yeah.
reality is, and I think like most things, it's a moving target,
Right.
and probably something not to be too obsessed about, because I don't think, I mean, if we're talking about it in terms of, you know, what's happening in the world around us right now, you know, the actual, it's like I talk a lot about, you know, I use the word existential quite a lot, but I don't mean it in the sort of, you know, early 20th century kind of Camus
Hmm.
school as much as, I mean, I'm talking about existence, what it means to be alive in the world now,
Yes.
the existentialness of being human. If we're talking about reality, I mean, we talk so definitively, oh, this is what's happening, but then you only have to move to another part of the world to realize that something actually, yeah, of course there are similarities and stuff because you live in a certain period of history. There are going to be dynamics that ebb and flow in certain ways, probably across most of the world at any given moment. I mean, not everybody has access to the internet, but enough people do for it to be something that most people in the world can converse in some
Yeah.
way or some form about. Not, I wouldn't. Nothing's ever 100%, but our perceptions of what the world means, what the world is, what reality is, they're all shaped so much by the worlds that we come of age in. The information that we amass, the things that we're given insight to, the bits that we're blind to. So when when we're trying to describe reality, again, it's hold your horses. It's a way, yeah, you've done a nice job of encapsulating it, but there's a million other ways that people are going to be looking at it too, and holding to it just as firmly. And then somebody goes, oh, well,
Hmm.
that's all relativism. Well, yes and no. I mean, because I think and this probably goes all the way back to my sort of fascination with, continental philosophy and Derrida and all those people. I mean, the whole notion of this kind of overarching narrative that addresses everybody's life,
Hmm. Hmm.
everybody's reality. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that
Yeah.
personally.
You're
You know,
you're polyamorous.
there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
what's Freud's earlier thing? Polymorphously perverse, isn't that what he
yeah,
said?
yeah, yeah.
Go
Well,
on.
but I want to go back to this to make it a little more personal because you said something really important that because this is a common theme, as we're talking about realities, you know, um, a common theme is that there is some kind of to be reductive, unfortunately, there's some kind of symptom that happens,
Yeah,
some unrest, some longing, some pain, some discomfort, some trauma, some radical experience, whatever. It could be a thought, it could be something like a big hit to the worldview,
yeah.
and then you went searching for something, and you're working with depression or melancholia and looking through religious traditions, and the larger collective narratives weren't serving for you,
Mm. Yeah.
and so but then you had a kind of something to fight against a little bit. There's like a is that safe to say? I'm taking some liberties
Yeah,
there.
yeah, sure.
Okay, and so then that takes you into this space of like transgression, rock and roll, like well, maybe it wasn't linear, but
Yeah, no, definitely not linear because the sort of rock and roll thing came first, really.
yeah.
Um, but 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 yes, I think what I've tried to do in life is follow very faint threads of curiosity. Like,
Hmm.
like if you find a piece of rope in the sand and, you tug on it and it could be just a little piece of string, or, you could have like hit a rope that tied to a ship, you know what I mean? And
Yeah, yeah.
I sort of tried to sort of pick up the various threads, if you like, or ropes inside me and just sort of follow them for a little while, or well, actually for quite a long while, because a
Hmm.
lot of these things. It was funny. I came across this old school report a few years ago from when I was 8 years old, and the when I was looking at it, it was funny, but the three subjects that I was best at when I was 8, and it was 8 years and 5 months. That's how precise the school report was music, art, and religion.
Wow.
And those three things have ultimately been multiple threads, because there are lots of tentacles to all of those that I followed my entire life. Now, you could look at that and you can go, oh, well, God was there from the beginning, or what? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say no, but I'm not going to say yes. I mean, there are things that you sort of look at and you go, that's kind of interesting. There it was. It was just latent. For whatever reason, those were impulses, and rather than trying to work out the source of those things or the trajectory of those things, I'm just interested in where the rope's taking me right now. So in terms of the sort of nomadic thing, it's more for me, it's like there's that quote from Virginia Woolf. She said, I'm rooted, but I flow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of how I feel. I to go back to that sort of nomadic thing, really, that I'm just sort of journeying with these things that interest me in my life, and when they bump up against the world, and something becomes like, just lately, I've found myself, for instance, sort of excuse me, really kind of delving deep into art. I mean, it's always been there, but just lately, it's just become something that's kind of been accentuated, and I've been doing a little bit more writing about art and stuff like that. I don't know why, you know what I mean? It's just whatever, just things sort of present themselves because I just keep tugging at that rope. And there's lots of other little ropes that I tug at as well. Do you know what I mean? But
Of course.
when I think about my sort of life, it's under the umbrella. What's interesting to me about those three things, art, music, and religion, is that in some ways, all three are transgressive in their own right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're different forms of transgression, and I think different kinds of transgressions occur within them. And it might seem strange to say that religion is transgressive, because mostly religion is viewed, I think, as a largely sort of conserving, protective kind of preservation mechanism, particularly in our sort of Western world, where we did a lot of dismissal or marginalizing of aspects of life connected to religion, particularly here in Britain. But there's something, I think, and I think that's what really, I mean, what really got me when I was sort of digging deep into Christianity, but not yet formally engaged. But I I was I was on the road with a band, and I was reading. I read through the whole Bible. I tend to be a bit obsessive when
Obsessive and extremist. Yeah.
yeah. Like I read a lot anyway, so I'm always
Yeah.
reading. And if I'm reading something, I sort of commit to reading it and do it anyway, And but so when I got in the Gospels, I was just really struck. And again, it was sort of timely. I was really struck by the transgressiveness of Jesus in the Gospel. The fact that and there, I know people, he didn't come to abandon the law, but to fulfill it and stuff like that. But you only have to sort of look at the stories to go, well, he had a very strange way of going about it, because he seemed to piss off all the religious people all the time, And I was really struck by the stories of his encounters with women. And the one that really got me was the story where the woman comes and anoints his feet with perfume and tears.
Mm-hmm.
There's this incredibly dramatic moment in the story where he's in a Pharisee's house who's very dismissive of the woman because chances are she's a prostitute, you know. So all of this defilement that's going on.
Yeah.
And there was this dramatic statement. It says, looking at the woman, he said to the Pharisee, "Do you see this woman?" And I read that, and I was just struck by the drama. Because if you think about it, if I'm asking you a question and I'm looking at the very thing I want to ask you if you can see, chances are you're going to be looking directly at that thing because you're going to follow my gaze as well. So, but he couldn't see. He was blinded by his own prejudices. And to me, that was like, that was what appealed, the sort of transgressive notion, you know. And, you know, I mean, it's probably easier to identify in music and the arts because it's sort of understood, or at least seen, that quite often music particularly has a rebellious or transgressive posture to it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because in music things get said that you can't necessarily say elsewhere. As in art, things get painted and stories get told and given voice to. That I just saw that there's an exhibition of the last painting of Caravaggio here in London,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called The Martyrdom of St. Ursula, and it was his last painting, painted a couple of months before he died. And it's, you know, I love Caravaggio, the artist, and you know, he was transgressive as a human being, you know, always arrested and being in fights and all that stuff. But his art was also transgressive because he essentially generated a whole new way of painting, you know, with light and shadow. And in this painting, a couple of months before he died, he's one of the people in the picture. He paints himself, and he's got light on his face, looking up to the sky, and and it's about the martyrdom of this virgin who becomes, you know, one of the saints of the church. And the whole painting, though, it's sensual. You know, she's got like that. So she's got a look on her face of like kind of calm, but bewilderedness as well. I don't know. You know what I mean? So when you think about these elements, it's like they're inscribed with a kind of um, bound, and to me, transgressive in a sense means simply that it crosses boundaries that needn't be boundaries. You know, it's like music, the the story of Orpheus and the underworld. You know what I mean?
Glad you went
So,
there. Yeah.
so music is, you know, he goes into the underworld to charm the gods to get his wife back,
Mm-hmm.
and but then looks back, and his wife gets pulled back into Hades, and he then spends the rest of his time sort of singing, you know, out in nature. But the music, it bridges, you know, the above world and the underworld, and maybe, you know, the overworld. You know what I mean? So it crosses. You know, he could charm humans, but he could also enchant the gods with his music. So to me, that's sort of what I mean by transgressive. It's always going to push at the things that really we push against anyway, but it gives it a form and a shape to do that. you know, and maybe religion is a more polite transgression. But if you think about it, it it, it, it's mad. You know, it's like when I left Los Angeles, you know, because I lived in LA for a long time, and I had um, a number of sort of communities that I was involved with over the years. But I was involved in a little community before I left, and on the Sunday that I left, I gave a little talk, and I said, here's what I've learned from 30 years of theology and religion, and I just want to leave this with you. If I can summarize it all, this is what I think is important. Be fucking kind.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most transgressive thing you can be, because I think kindness is probably the most underrated of all human virtues.
Yeah.
One that we claim, but I think we know very little about, really. And to be kind in our world, you know, because I think we live in a judgment culture.
Yeah,
Whether it's
but kind isn't cool.
no, kind. Well, because it's characterized usually by a sort of sense of weakness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you know, we live in this world where everybody's got an opinion about everything, and you know, all of our television shows, they're all shows of judgment.
Yeah.
don't like don't like that cake, don't like that painting, don't like that singer, X Factor, American Idol, British Idol, you know, Great British Bake Off, you know, what, pick a show. It's judgment everywhere you turn. It's judgment. You know,
Yeah.
you go on social media, it's judgment, you know.
Mm.
It's and so to infuse what would be the most transgressive thing in a culture of judgment, I think it might actually be kindness.
Well, so let's get into this for a second, because that brings up, that's fascinating and so true. Uh, what is cool? That dates me. That word, I think, really dates me. But what is cool? There is something that we um, idolize about the criticism,
Mm,
and the most critical, the biggest judge is going to be the most famous. And
yeah,
that kind of gets back into what I was saying about my dissertation. Like, you can pay attention to what a culture um, gives fame to,
yeah,
the various people that are famous, and then draw some very important threads to what that value system of the culture is. And here we are in
yeah,
judgment centric. Like, you
yeah,
would
yeah,
think that and sorry to keep going, but I think, as I'm thinking about this, I'm joking about, you and I share a love of tattoos.
yeah,
I started getting tattoos in the 90s, and it
yeah.
was very transgressive, and it was like
So,
radical. And I'm still getting tattoos because I happen to, that's part of an identity piece for me. But it's no longer the same. It doesn't have the same kind of edge that it used to.
no, no, I mean, it was so interesting. It's so interesting when you see things like that just become mainstreamed,
Yes.
you know. And you know, I mean, they even have tattoo judgment shows, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, so but yeah, I mean,
Ah, your tattoo sucks, man. That's not shit, you know?
no, no, yeah, and a lot of them do. Let's just face it, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I can sort of remember, you know, there were, you know, you couldn't get a job at certain
No.
times. You couldn't show
No.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, you couldn't even get a job at Starbucks initially, and you had to cover up wear your sleeves down or whatever, you know.
Absolutely.
You couldn't have piercings, and now it's like if you don't have those things,
Yes.
you know. So yeah, I mean, it's very interesting how, and of course, you know, there are those people that go, oh, well, that's what's all that's wrong with the world, is everybody's got tattoos and we've normalized, you know, this, and it should have been, it remained marginalized or whatever. But there again, in a world like ours, where we've placed so much responsibility on the shoulders of the person. And have you ever read that Charles Taylor's book, The Secular Age?
Whoa, no, but yeah, I know his stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. I mean, I could criticize his take on
Sure.
sexuality. And I mean, no, actually, I don't, but he talks in there about the fact that in the sort of pre-modern world, like the sort of late medieval world, to be religious was to be part of an order in society. Like the religious were the clerics and the monastics and the scholars, and they did the business of religion.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who sort of did all the praying and all of that stuff. And in the transition into the modern world and into the secular world, um, belief and faith was sort of placed on the shoulder of the individual in a way that it wasn't before. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you go to most sort of regular churches, and they sort of ask you about how your journey with God is going. It's like, how's your walk with the Lord or whatever, and it's like, well, have you done this and this and this and this and this? And there's a lot of stuff that people bear on their shoulders without the connectivity of community
Mm-hmm.
in a way. And I think that for a lot of people, their body is the last place that they feel somewhat, I don't know if control of is the right word, but I think the flesh gets marked because at least you've got your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to abandon you. Well, it one day it will, but until then, this is what you've got, your life, your body. And I think part of the rise, when I was doing my PhD, I had to do a field research thing, and I just I just didn't want to do something, so I did some sort of research studies in a bunch of tattoo and body piercing.
What was your
uh,
dissertation?
Oh, it was on postmodern culture and theology, bullshit, but
All
but
right, man. Yes.
but I wanted to sort of look at, and essentially everybody that I talked to um, essentially said that they were marking themselves to mark something. It wasn't just,
Mm,
oh, I mean, a couple of people, oh yeah, I got a little drunk and I got, blah blah blah, but not really. Most people had actually given it serious thought,
right.
and whether or not they gave enough thought to tastefulness, that's a different
Yeah.
story. But they gave a lot of thought and care, and there was an awful lot of heartfelt
Mm,
meaning attached to what they marked their body with. And I think, we do it to address woundedness, to address moments of accomplishment, of
mhm.
moments of despair, all of those kind of things. And it's I I don't know. Is it transgressive to get tattooed anymore? I think I think I used to think it was really transgressive if you got tattooed on your face, which I'm not really a big fan of.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
at face and neck just not doesn't thrill me. And there used to be a lot of, not that long ago, a lot of tattoo places that wouldn't tattoo
Oh
people's
yeah.
face.
Yeah.
But now it's almost like the last thing to go, and now you can get your face tattooed anywhere, and people do it. That might be the last transgressive edge, I think, of tattooing. I don't know.
Mm.
It could easily. I have no hard, fast researched opinion on it. It's just a feeling at the moment. But
Well, it's hard not to. The same guy. There's a Jungian analyst in my office here who did a study also on tattoos and piercings, and the beard and facial hair, and almost takes this like psychoanalytic approach to how we differentiate ourselves and what how we use our bodies to express I- interior aspects of our
yeah,
psyche in the
yeah,
exterior, and how it always has meaning. Always, like there's even if it's the little drunken Tweety bird that it's like, oh yeah, I screwed up one night and This is what
Oh
I
yeah.
got. There's something in there that is expressing some deeper meaning. But I want to jump also into this piece you were talking about that I like a lot about our judgment shows. And what's really fascinating about this is it's almost like there's something about being the most critical is a way of standing out,
Yeah.
and so that's part of what we're valuing is like, oh, we're so inundated with all this shit everywhere that you
Yeah.
have to be the best critic,
Yeah.
and that gets you the pathway to success.
Yeah. And also, I think on a if I was going to try and find some positivity in it, which I find quite difficult actually, because
Mm-hmm.
I really sort of don't like the vibe, even when it's benign, even when it's just about a cake. And I
Uh-huh.
don't watch any of those shows either. But I do think it represents a deeper issue of feeling unheard,
Mm.
unannounced,
Mm-hmm.
and um, disavowed in a way from but and ultimately I would say by capitalism, without or by the consumer capitalist world that we find ourselves in, that is so incredibly cutthroat. More and more
Mm-hmm.
people are left behind, and I think it's like swearing. I think it's quite often uh, the the way in which someone uses language to be heard when they're not being listened to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of swearing, by the way. So.
Well, I am too, and I think a lot of times I started when I was working with adolescents. I worked as a psychotherapist in an adolescent treatment center,
Yeah,
and it was weird. At one point, they asked us to wear ties, and I
yeah,
thought how horrible of an idea that was, because what I talked about most was the music we listened to.
mm,
I wore Vans, and so we always talked about shoes, and we talked about tattoos.
yeah,
And one of the ways that I really built some degree of relatedness quickly is it's kind of it brings some commonality and some transgression into the language system, where
yeah,
you're like, I'm not like a lot of people who are way overly pretentious and socially obedient. That's not my game here, and it's a way to connect. And so
yeah.
I think when I'm with you, I'm quite fond of all the
Yeah.
all the words.
Me too. I'm a big fan of Vans as well.
Yeah, They're- that's it's one of my the most common shoe in my closet.
But yeah, I have a little bit of a shoe fetish. I mean, I wrote about that in my
Yes.
book, as you know, and I have very, very strong opinions about shoes.
Well, let's talk about this then, because I've actually got it up to talk about fashion, cultural expression. We're already on
Yeah.
tattoos, so riff on that for a little bit.
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in fashion, you know, as a means of self-expression, but also, what the history of dress, the history of
Hmm.
clothing, clothing ourselves, what that represents, and the transitions that have occurred as we've moved into a supposedly democratized society, but a society where what you wear is not governed by your status in society, but you're
Hmm.
to purchase it basically.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? But I've always but I've had a lifelong, and I think that probably comes out of both music and art. Um, I mean, part of music, or pop music, is performance, and and the way that people dress, and and particularly back in the day. I mean, those things sort of change, but the way we position ourselves in the world and are positioned by the way that we dress or don't dress, and what those things can can mean, the sort of the way and how we came to sort of dress that way. I mean, it's funny because you think about hippie culture in California in the 60s and 70s, and then you think about hippie culture in London,
Mm.
and culture in London was, well, they're still wearing suits,
Hmm.
just happened to be, bright purple paisley. But
Right.
it's, you look at early Beatles, you look at the Beatles in their sort of hippie heyday, and they're still wearing like suits and ties and flowery shirts and stuff like that. And then you look at California, and it's like, it's sort of a weird sort of hybrid of Native American cowboy, pioneer, settler, vintage, prairie dress kind of a deal, with but of course in England you you got to deal with the different kind of weather, you know what I mean? But they both were sort of transgressive ways of dressing, and pop music was very instrumental. I in that. I mean, again, over here, there are debates in Parliament about Beatles haircuts, which when you look at them now,
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
like, that's mad. Or, the Sex Pistols, and their whole thing. So there's a transgressive nature to dressing against type and against convention and against social order, but we clothe
Mm.
ourselves, and we clothe ourselves very specifically. You go around the world, and cultures have ways of dressing that reflect a kind of self-understanding,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that always sort of fascinated me. In fact, last year I spent quite a long time on my Patreon thing, doing talks on like the philosophy and theology of fashion. Talking about shirts and dresses and coats and shoes. There's that great book by the Russian writer whose name escapes me now, called The Overcoat. It's one of the greatest stories ever about this guy that has a threadbare coat, and then he, finally gets a coat. And I don't want to spoil the story, but like this, what this coat represents. And you think about the way that we both adorn ourselves and protect ourselves. And if you think about it, I mean, there's Giorgio Agamben. He has this book called Nudities,
Mm.
the Italian philosopher, and it's sort of essays on that. And there's a bit in there, and he quotes somebody whose name escapes me at the moment. Sorry, because I didn't know we were going to get here. But this guy basically said that he was sort of went all the way back to the book of Genesis as a foundational part of the sort of Judeo-Christian shaping of Western society.
Mm.
And he said, nudity in our culture has a theological signature.
Oh, without a doubt.
So, you start with nakedness,
Yeah.
and then you get clothed, and your nakedness is signed, if you like, signed by God by providing you with a covering,
Mm.
I don't know, but also uh, um, a symbolizing of actually, depending on how you read those stories in the book of Genesis, a symbol of, a covering as they go out into humanity, away from this earthly paradise thing into their humanity. Because I think that's where humans come when they get kicked out of the garden, not when they're in it. I don't think there's any going back to paradise. I think the human journey begins after you've been expelled from this,
Mm.
from that
Waking
world.
up.
But anyway, so you can look, you can look at all those things, and I've always been I don't know why. I've always been fascinated by shoes. I've said more than once, if I had more time, I probably would have learned to be a shoemaker.
Mm.
Don't know why. I just, but I think shoes have a lot to say about. Um, well, I was sorry, these are tangents, but it's the best way of describing it. A few years ago, I was approached by a publishing company. They wanted to know if I was be interested in writing a book about religion and U2 because it was trendy back. This must have been the 90s before I gave up, while they were doing their good albums. That was a judgment. But anyway,
You're in the culture of judgment.
yeah. But after pop, it all went downhill for me from them. But anyway, so the golden years were the albums that people don't like. But I basically wrote up this proposal, and I sort of said that you can understand U2 through Bono's clothes, from his sunglasses to his shoes.
Oh man, I did an analysis of this too. I think it's fantastic.
He's not a tall man,
Mm-hmm.
so he tends to wear boots, but he also in the beginning wore what in England are called brothel creepers, which were a part of a sort of early punk and pre-punk teddy boy culture. They're like those suede shoes with like quite thick crepe soles, and they're very solid. They root you to the earth, and
Mm-hmm.
there's something very earthy about U2, even though their music deals, I think, with unresolved otherness, which you get
Mm-hmm.
in Tower of the Edge, because echo and delay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
those ring out forever, and there's something in the particular sound of, again, that everybody sort of focuses on the words, but it's the music of U2 that tells you their spiritual trajectory, I think, which is this: they still haven't found what they're looking for. And when Edge gives up playing echo, delay, and reverb on his guitar, they might have found something. Do you know what I mean? But in the meantime, that sort
It's
of ringing
keeping
out,
loose. Yes.
it's hanging out there. And I was talking about sunglasses, and coats that the sleeves are always too long, like sort of hiding your hands, so you're wearing a. It's almost like, I also it's like Charlie Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
When Charlie Chaplin created that character, he that defined him. All those clothes, the tramp, from the hat down to the shoes, they were all like, in a sense, clothes that, had they been the right size and new, would have made him look like a banker or a
Mm-hmm.
business. But instead, it's from the head to the feet. It's like, he's tied up and wrapped up and frayed and dismayed. I mean, it's the perfect figure for the period of time when Chaplin was making those films. And you sort of can feel in the clothes just all of this stuff going on. So so I've always sort of looked around the world and been fascinated by what we wear and why we wear it, and I am very judgmental about clothes. I've got to be honest.
Well, you
Um,
mentioned two of the people that I've really enjoyed. Um, when I teach this subject of fame, I like to reference Bono and David Bowie,
yeah,
both
well,
two individuals really playing with. I mean, Bowie being this ultimate magician type that's just playing
yeah,
with everything transgressive. But what's fascinating about Bono is that he's part of that. One element that I really liked about Bono is that he had to process his own shadow on stage,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Well,
and he's
that was part of the genius.
Genius. You know, like
Yeah.
not a lot of people are using that space.
Mm-mm.
It's playing out unconsciously, and they're like Marilyn Monroe. She's not using that intentionally. She's having that evoked from her, and she's having to live out this kind of
Yeah.
personless.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there is that thing in, I mean, the difference sort of between an actor and a musician is that an actor has a part imposed upon them,
Mm-hmm.
both, you know, in a film, but also then in life. You know, they become that sort of trapped in a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, whereas a musician sort of generates and creates their persona, or in Bowie's case, personas. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, I love. I mean, you know, when Bowie showed up, it was just like, what is, you know, what is this? This you have to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You know,
Still.
here's a guy in the early 70s in a dress.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I mean, people sort of probably can look at that now and go, oh yeah, no big thing, because so many people wear, you know, will do that now, you know, but Bowie's sort of use of transgressive
Mm-hmm.
action and also dress, you know, a lot of Japanese designers, so
Mm-hmm.
theatrical and all that stuff. But yeah, so anyway, so needless to say, I didn't get to do that book because they didn't think that really held any theological weight.
Oh.
But I actually thought it was the way to sort of, it was a good entry point, because I think what, when you look at what people are wearing, and why perhaps they wear it, you know, it's like music doesn't come from nowhere, you know. Heavy metal music didn't start in the Caribbean on some idyllic island. It started in post-industrial, high unemployment, futureless towns in the
Mm-hmm.
English or British and American, largely Midwest steel car
Yeah.
belts.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the music is uh, a cry of frustration against uh, an unrealized dream that still continues to be sold. You know what I mean? So music is always anchored. It emerges from context, and dress as well. You know.
You mentioned in your book you were talking about Brian Eno and this reference about how rock and roll is. You said something about it being mistakes, you know, or like
Oh, yeah,
letting.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a whole history of songs that, you know. It's like there's that. What's the Police song? Is it Roxanne? Where at the beginning there's this like really sort of sinister laugh, and
Mm,
apparently you know, one of them, I think it was Sting, sort of tripped in the studio and
mm.
fell back on the piano and laughed, and they just left it in. Or, you know, Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock, there's a drum beat that kicks it off, and it's like a crack right at the beginning of the song, and it's left over from another tape because they were taping over something. It defines that song. It like gives it the signature kind of moment, you know. And yeah, I mean, Eno's great with that whole thing about mistakes and imperfections. And again, that's what troubled me after a while with formalized Christianity, was its obsession with perfectionism,
Mm.
while at the same time saying you don't have to be perfect. It was like it was a dual, it was a fork, sort of two things at the same time. You know, God accepts you as you are, now clean up your act. You know what I mean? And you can go, yeah, well, yeah, of course, but but this thing where you've got to be better than you are. which is it's just modernist. There's always a better version of you out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I've come to is, we don't change that much. There are parts of us, I think we get a handle on parts of ourselves. We can deal with ourselves better. I think that's what I sort of learned from therapy and psychoanalysis. There ain't no cure.
Right.
There's a coming to terms with yourself, and of course, yeah, I'm not saying that we shouldn't try and be better, more accountable to ourselves and to others as human beings, but this kind of illusion that the goal is perfection and always a higher level of something to go to, that concerns me a lot. I think it stumbles a lot of people because it implies the application of a lot of willpower. And not everybody, people don't always have that capacity. It's like, in the forms of Christianity that I was exposed to and involved in, as with most, big issues around sex and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
No sex till you get married. Uh, I mean, I'm not even going to debate the positives and the negatives. All I'm going to say is um, it's a very different battle for someone who's in their mid-30s to sort of still be dealing with, and some people run out of steam. It's like I think there are certain things in life that one person has no problem with and someone else struggles every single moment with. And for whatever, it's like some people aren't bothered by I don't know, by drinking. Other people don't know how to stop drinking. And some people can stop drinking for quite a long time. Some people can't go more than a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean? If you make it all about that person's responsibility, people are going to crack up at different moments in time. And I think we have to sort of create spaces where rather than we make promises of future wholeness, we create environments of current acceptedness and solidarity. Again, that's one of the things I love about Matt and the work that he's done with people, in AA and programs like that. You know what I mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one of the things to prize about AA is, that whole component that not only one day at a time, but a kind of radical acceptance of,
You're welcome here.
yeah, and you're welcome in your brokenness
Yes.
as you are broken for as long as you're broken. And if you keep coming here, the welcome is extended. It's not like, it's not, excused. Nobody's excusing anything, but we're asking something else of each other, I think. I don't know. That was a bit of a sidebar. We should go back
Well,
to,
I don't know. Let me tend to that for a second, because you had said, everybody eventually is going to crack up, and
yeah,
I go back to where we started again around your melancholy and your depression. That
yeah,
you went to a religious tradition that offered you some collective narrative about the largeness of this existence, and what you really needed is community. And I think that's where we get wounded today when we say, "Hey, I'm suffering because suffering is inherent in this existence, and
yeah.
I'm coming to you because you seem to hang a shingle out in the world that says, come on in here, you're broken." And then you're telling me to pray this way and bow this way and speak this way and worship that way and don't do this and do that. And then inherently there's a split where I'm like, I just wanted a cup of coffee and somebody to talk to.
Well, I mean, I said for many years, which didn't always go down well with my peers, that I didn't think most people came to church for God. I think they came for the donuts after.
That's it. Yes.
And I think they
Yeah.
endured. I think they endured the bullshit that was going on. They
Yes.
but
Man, I think data supports that. I think that's like, like for example, you see this trend where a lot of people end up going to church, certainly in the United States. This is where I know a lot of the research after they have children.
yeah,
They are going for a social reason. It's a social experience.
and there's not in, and as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing really wrong with that. You
Not at
know,
all. Not at
I,
all.
I think, in fact, I think sometimes, you could turn off the God bit for a while and just, just just make space for or make room for those kind of things. I mean, I understand, that there are other things that can be addressed in those environments, and there's a beauty to it all. But I do think sometimes the reasons why people are drawn to things isn't for the reasons we presume they are.
Yeah. Well
There's a
said.
lot of, and there's as much in there's as much imposition of false desire in religion sometimes as there is in the broader culture with regard to the promises of capital. You know what I
Mm.
mean? You want this. This is going to give you satisfaction when really, I mean, I don't think we even know our own desire. So to speak for somebody else's desire, like this is what's going to meet your need, I don't know, because we all live. I think, my favorite one of the books I like most of Freud's, and the one that I've returned to the most, is Civilization and Its Discontents.
Mhm.
And because I really love that idea of the the sort of anxiety that comes from the challenge of having to temper our innate impulse
Mhm.
within the structures of a society to get the sort of communal experience that we also want. You know what I mean? But there's a tension there. You know what I mean? And again, I think we could make room in contemporary expressions of religion for that tension, rather than presuming that we've got the remedy for the tension. You know what I mean?
That actually tracks in our moral development, that we actually strengthen our connections and our integrity through conflict. And
Mm.
rather than be taught to avoid conflict, like why can't we get into religious spaces and talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll and money? And like to me that's where the transgressive is. It's that, can I get into these public spaces and have a dialogue around these? Like money, for example, is a great, like,
Yeah,
what is that to you, and
yeah.
what role does
And,
it serve?
yeah, and also I would, the only caveat I'd want to put on that is I wouldn't want to frame it as they so often do, what Jesus has to say about money.
Totally. Yeah.
What Jesus knows about money is essentially nothing
Right.
in terms of how we understand money today.
Right.
Because in the first century or whenever, money was a whole different thing.
Hmm.
For a start, that currency didn't exist in the way we understand it.
Well, and
Money.
sex for that reason, like for that matter,
I
sex
mean,
and money were different.
yeah, and it's not to dismiss those things. It's to go back to my nomadic thing to say that, in those points of reference that are there, and those polarities are there,
Hmm.
discussion about sexuality or money or greed. I mean, they're all in there because
Hmm.
those are issues that have been around since the
Right.
dawn of, since whenever it began, whether whatever happened, when, who knows. I'm not a big before or after person, trying to make it in the middle, but there are points of reference. They're not directives. I think they're points of reference around which we can understand that these have value to the human story. What we think about money. I mean, it's so, over here in England at the moment. there's this, and it might be true in America. I haven't been for a while now, but banks are closing all of their branches here. Like there's this really weird thing where, because most people do their banking online now, the banks don't want the real estate, so they're sort of pulling out, and now there's a debate, because there are unforeseen things like businesses can't go to the bank and get change for their tills, because some people still use cash.
Right.
We're not in a fully cashless society, but banks are acting like we are, because it makes much more sense for them to have less people on the ground, paying for real estate and stuff like that. And they're sort of driving people towards sort of online banking. But you think about, I think about my own journey with money, and being old enough to sort of remember the world of cash and checks, and paying for things in shops with checks. And then the sort of moving, or credit cards and things like that, and how now, you just tap your phone, or if you're in China, it takes a picture of your face, and you don't even use a device anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's what, 50 something, 55% of all retail points of sale in China are done on facial recognition. So there's the future, is that you won't even need a phone to take money out of your account. They're just going to look at your face, and that's going to be it. But so money has gone invisible.
Yeah, it's such an abstraction. Yeah.
It's completely abstract now. And on one level, it's like, it's a weird relief. Like, you don't have to sort of sit down and look at your pile of bills now. You just hope you've got enough money in your bank account when they're taken out by direct debit. But there's a sort of weird liberation, but also the terror of not having enough money. But you know what I mean? But there are all these things that I think we jump on the train, and the train leaves the station, and then we start to think retroactively about all the challenges. AI would be another, the whole sort of uproar about AI and chatbots, and all of those things. We think, technology is a god. I mean, digitality is the new god. It's the premise of salvation, and we just, every iteration of technology is the promise of salvation and liberation, but nobody, nobody accounted for the fact that you can't walk along a street and walk in a straight line, because everybody's looking at their phone and walking like this, and you can't get around people, or people get off a train or a subway or a bus, and they stop right outside the door and turn their phone on, and don't no, or walk along with headphones on, completely sort of oblivious, or having loud conversations, sometimes angrily in public, so the loss of privacy, and this kind of collapse of like social bonds and things, or unspoken rules of politeness.
To me, that's it's interesting. Back to your be fucking kind. That is the transgressive, isn't it? If that's the flow of our digital landscape, then to get outside of that. My son went to a college party a while ago and was like enamored with a guy who had a flip phone.
Yeah.
He was like the one that stood out.
Oh, they're making a comeback. There was a big article in one of the newspapers a couple of weeks ago about the fact that people are sort of turning away from like all the full-on engagement and just going back to very simple texts and stuff like. I mean, that's Marshall McLuhan. That was his big thing. That there's always a kind of, I think in his tetragram, his four laws. A new technology makes the old technology obsolete, but then eventually there's like a return.
Hmm.
you know, and you go back, you know, it's like radio. I mean, radio's had a recovery, but it's on
Yeah.
the internet. So it's not really radio, but we call it radio. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
You know, or like blogging went away and now it's come back as Substack. I mean,
Right.
Substack is just blogging in the 21st century.
Right. That's
That's all
right.
it is. It's a blog. It's just this Substack, but it's a blog. It's really what it is. I think, you know, it's a writing environment. I think that's what blogging was. But anyway, yeah. But all those conversations, I think they're deeply um, theological and philosophical. There's nothing not theological about a conversation about technology and how we deal with otherness,
Hmm.
you know, as in literally other people, but also the way in which, you know, there's that interesting book by Margaret Wertheim, the Pearly Gates of Cyberspace. Have you read that?
No, no.
Came out, like it's old now. I think it came out in 2000. So you know, we live in an age when a book that's that old is kind of almost out of date. You know, but her whole premise, you know, it's like a history of our relationship to the celestial realm. You know, the realm of the gods and the stuff like that, and how you know we go online. Well, we sort of enter into a form of eternity, of the eternal. It's you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I mean, it's a cloud and things disappear into it. You know, it holds memory. It holds not just information, but it takes you places, and it evokes this. To go back to you know where we began with kind of mystery and stuff like that. But you know, Derrida, no, I think it was Lyotard said that the that was one of those French philosophers, can't remember which one right now, sort of said that the growing disconnect between our reliance upon but our ignorance of technologies. You know, so I'm talking to you. How?
Yeah.
Don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. Ones and zeros. I've seen the Matrix, still don't get it. So you know, um, but he said that the growing disconnect between our reliance upon technologies about which we're ignorant opens up a space for what he called the rise and the return of the animistic, the magical,
Hmm.
and the mystical.
Totally get that.
And I think you know you can account for trends in spirituality through the technologies that we employ.
Well, say
You know,
say more about that. Get a little specific there.
you know. Uh, Again, Marshall McLuhan, the cultural theorist, um, he sort of talked about the fact that it was print, the you know printing press and print technology that gave us individualism, Protestantism,
Hmm.
democracy, and nationalism, and all of the things. You know that all came with the printing press. The manuscript, you know, so he had oral culture, manuscript culture, uh, text, and then what he called electric or electronic culture. You know, because he died in 1980, but sort of anticipated you know the dawn of television and stuff like that, and you know and that's where he sort of said you know that the medium is the message, like so if you want to know what's going on, you don't look at the actual thing, you look at the world that's made by the thing. So it's not television that you look at, you look at what television has done. So what did television do? Well, television extended our senses way beyond our ability, you know, like, or the telephone. The telephone extended your hearing and your speech beyond the norm. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Television comes along and now it extends your sight. So you can sit at home and you can watch David Attenborough or
Mm.
Disney's World of Wonder and you can go all around the world, but you never leave your living room. And now we're on in a world of digitality where everything, if you like, is at our fingertips. And it's no surprise to me that there has been a sort of seismic shift in interest in sort of magic and mysticism, whether it's, Instagram full of tarot cards and astrology and all of those things. I'm just really not surprised. I think it's actually part of the message of the medium of digitality. I think there's always a link between the technologies that we employ and the kind of gods we experience, or the ways in which we experience the gods, or the lack thereof, or the ultimate, the other, mystery, lack, the void, emptiness, nothingness. I think that gets changed by the horizon of our technological world, because McLuhan also said, we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us.
Yeah, they're metaphor making.
Yeah, and they shift our consciousness.
Yeah.
Again, I think it was McLuhan, maybe somebody else, sort of traced the sort of growing environmental ecological movement and a more universal sense of humanity to the shots of the earth from the surface of the moon, because we'd never seen ourselves floating in space before. And that image connects us to, as a profound image. Again,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
it's old hat now. I mean, because now you can make that digitally. Now we make up whole worlds. I mean, you think about
Yeah.
the first Star Wars. You know what I mean? Pre CGI. What could be made, and now you don't know what world. All kinds of worlds are possible. You know what I mean? And I think really that shifts our perspective on how we think about things. And consequently, alongside even the spiritual stuff, it's no surprise to me that the kind of UFO alien
Mm-hmm.
conversation also expands. Why not, when all of our films and stuff are all about alien creatures, that either are benign or one, I mean, it's interesting, movies sort of traded so much in apocalypticism and still do. They're always out to get us. It's bad out there. I don't know. We're going off a lot of tangents.
Yeah, thank you, because we do need to start closing out it a little bit, and
But
I'm
we haven't
like,
been talking very long.
yeah. Well, and I'm really kind of bummed about that, because we just got on to aliens and fucking transgression, and
we can
so,
come back. We can come back to transgressive aliens some other time.
well, but I think, I guess the thought there that I had is maybe a question, from your perspective, are we moving along, or is that an illusion? Because on some level, we imagine that the technological is kind of moving us
Yeah.
in a space, but then it also feels like, in a number of ways, it's very illusory, because we, so yeah, answer that, whatever you think.
Well, I do think that, we're still haunted by this idea of the future as, the kind of going from here to here,
Yeah.
and here is always better.
Yeah.
And when we get there, and we're going to get there now through technology,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be in a better place. And that to me is tied to the sort of progressive theory
Mm-hmm.
behind drives modernity. But I think it's a complete distraction, actually. And I don't think there is actually, I don't want to say, um, I I don't think that really there's sort of an end or a beginning, or somewhere to go or somewhere to be.
Right.
I think in some sense it's with all we can really do is deal with our current space in the world, and I think that's what we need to attend to. Always looking down. It's like we're in an election, well, you're in an election cycle in
Mm-hmm.
we it's different over here. So they just called an election last week, and there'll be a vote in 6 weeks' time. But for the last year or so, there's been all this talk, and everybody in politics at the moment, the word that they use all the time is growth. We want
Mm-hmm.
we want growth. My question is, what kind of growth is it that you say you want for everybody? And if it's the same old growth where you just want to make more money and have more people, and you're still going to hold on to your ridiculous trickle down theory of economics and keep prioritizing the needs of the wealthy over the more express needs of the disenfranchised and the poor, that's not a growth I'm interested in. That's an illusion that
Mm-hmm.
it's a false desire that, to put it in a sort of Freudian term, I don't think it's our desire. I don't think our desire lies in the future. And I don't think it's in the hands of AI or something else. I think it's actually in our hands, in our humanity. And I really think it's a question of asking ourselves, what kind of world makes what kind of world can we make in a very small, in our own small ways. I'm sort of done with the big projects of, we're gonna get here and we're all gonna be, it's all gonna be this. It's like, those ads from the 50s when the future was just around the corner, and
Yeah.
you all these pictures of, people with their personal flying saucer, but they were still wearing, like, pom pom skirts, and the guys were still dressed in like lounge suits or whatever, and they were still living in, ranch houses in the suburbs, but they're driving, spaceships and stuff like that. And we envision this. We constantly direct our attention down the road. It's gonna get better. It's gonna this. It's gonna that. And I think until we are willing to stop and go, we have to we have to arrest this idea that the future always holds something that we don't have now.
Mm.
Of course, there are lots of things that we don't have now, but I think the reason we don't have a lot of those is because we're so obsessed with what's coming, what we can create down the road that's supposedly going to make everybody, everybody's gonna do this. In the future, nobody will work. Why is everybody working more then?
Mm-hmm.
Technology, it's going to free us all from work. It's a bit like in the pandemic, there was that giddy moment when everybody went, wait a minute, the whole world has suddenly stopped. And maybe the world that we were living in wasn't wasn't working as well as we thought. And maybe this is a moment for a reframing of that. And that lasted a couple of months
Mm.
until everybody got back on making money. Well, I mean, I know people made money through it, but suddenly everybody's like, oh yeah, we just need to get back to business as back to, everybody needs to go shopping. Everybody needs to do this. We've got to get business back up. No, 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 you can't work from home. I mean, the irony here is that for the longest time, the government here was advocating people working from home.
Mm-hmm.
and then it was imposed upon people during the pandemic, and then afterwards they suddenly went, oh no, we can't do that because it's going to collapse. It's going to collapse the economy in a way that we don't want. It'll stop businesses from making more money, and we're going to have too much real estate, and people that own buildings
Right.
aren't able to like multiply their holdings and stuff. And so basically, we want to make sure that capital can still make capital. So we're going to go back to business as usual, and we're going to make that the future now. So yeah, I'm kind of done with the future, but I've been done for the future for a long time. And I think, I mean, as a child of the late 20th century, we lived with this mythic idea of the future. The year 2000 was such a big, I mean, like Y2K and all that
Oh man,
madness.
it was wild. Yeah.
It was insane. But again, not really unsurprising given the fact that we were in this era where the year 2000 and this millennial switch heralded so much in our cultural history through science fiction and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Well, you did. I mean, it sounds like there's an
it's cruel optimism.
Yeah. I like a number of folks that are looking at futurism as a kind of revelatory process that reflects for us our
Mhm.
current life. It's not so much about what is then as it is to help us actually get a peek into what we can't see
Yeah,
in our present moment. I need you to reflect me for me.
yeah,
And so we need that to reflect us for us.
yeah, yeah. I think the future is essentially a part of the sort of false desire of the world, and that the real task is to come to terms, to pay attention to our own desire, even though
Mhm.
we can't fully know what that desire is. But I think if we spent some time addressing our own desire,
Mhm.
so Lacanian as we wind up. Not that I know that about Lacan, but and not that enthralled, but I do think that desire is the driver of the human, and I do think that our desire gets interrupted by the collective desire of the powerful, trying to shape the world
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
particular way. And the disappointment a lot of people feel is because we embrace the false desire and sacrifice our own desire.
Mm. Well, Barry, thank you for this. This
Oh,
is a
thank you.
real,
Great
yeah,
conversation.
this is
I
a
hope
treat.
yeah. Checkerboard Vans or
I got a mix. I of course have the checkerboard Vans, but
yeah,
I've got several
slip
pairs
on,
of Vans.
slip ons or lace ups.
I've got primarily slip-ons, but I've got a couple lace-ups.
Yeah, I'm a hardcore slip on only.
Slip-on, yeah.
And we didn't. I just noticed that on that picture behind you, there's like skulls everywhere,
Yes,
and
yeah, it came on. That's one of my favorite pictures.
yeah, it's fantastic. I like a
I have
good skull.
I know you like skulls. Yeah, it's a good. I have a number of skulls around, so I like that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, me too.
You and I, yeah, you and I would hang out, Barry, if we lived in the same city.
Yeah, no, we certainly would.
Hey, man, really, like I look forward to a next time, and one day we'll get to be in each other's presence. But thank you for
Absolutely.
this.
Yeah, thank you for this. I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah. Anything else before we shut down?
Uh, no, just keep doing what you're doing.
Good. Amen, man.
All right, mate.
Hey, yeah, good to chat, Barry. Until next time.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Bye.
Control.